Okay. A very good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you all to this Speaker of the Month program. We are delighted to have with us a friend from the Embassy of Brazil. Please note that Brazil is one of the most important countries that has relations with Assumption University, apart from Peru. And we also have with us a couple of Brazilian students. I believe Barbara is here, right? And we also have Rafael. Is he with us this afternoon? Rafael? No? Okay, Rafael must be on the way or forgot to come or whatever. But I want to welcome you to this Speaker of the Month forum, and I don't want to take away time from our guest resource speaker. Let me just give you an introduction by saying welcome to Flavio and to our friends from the Embassy of Brazil, to all Brazilian friends at Assumption University. I'd like to bring before you this afternoon the Counselor, Head of Economics, Trade and Investment Affairs, Mr. Flavio Campestrin Bettarello, and I hope I pronounced your name well enough. Forgive me if I didn't, but has been serving in Bangkok since 2014. So this afternoon, I will permit him to speak a little bit of Brazilian, Portuguese, Thai, and English. All right? I do not know. We have students from several countries here. You might try your skills on them. But Councillor Flavio Bettarello is also known better as Brazil's Deputy Permanent Observer to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I think for us this afternoon, we've got to pay attention to the fact that he was the head of trade policy, intellectual policy, property, services, transportation, trilateral cooperation, okay, for about 3 years between 2010 and 2013. And then, of course, the CSO, the Chief Strategy Officer, for about a year at the Embassy of Brazil in Washington, D.C. And we are happy that, Flavio is not in Washington right now with Trump as head of affairs over there. Okay, I hope I don't get into trouble for making that statement. But in Brasilia, he was advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for about 2 years, between the years 2008 to 2010, and the Assistant Coordinator General of Economic Affairs for South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So it gives you a pretty strong flavor of his rather enviable international relations. Dr. Bettarello is a full professor of economics, so he's an Anjan as well, okay? As well as a former chair and head of applied economics at the Instituto Rio Branco, the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy. He was a visiting fellow of the Institute of International Economic Law and a visiting scholar at Georgetown University Law Center. Georgetown University is somewhat similar to Assumption, or should I say, Assumption is similar to Georgetown. We are both Catholic institutions. Okay, so I'm very happy that you were a visiting fellow there. Flavio has a PhD in behavioral sciences from the University of Brasilia, a master's in diplomacy from the Rio Branco Institute, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of São Paulo, and a Bachelor of Business Administration, and that's a similarity with many of us this afternoon, from the Getulio Vargas Foundation. He received graduate certificates from Johns Hopkins University, from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, New York University, and the University of California at Berkeley. You would be interested to note that Flavio is a recipient of the Prime Minister Thai Tradition and Cultural Promotion Award in 2016. The Rio Branco Award, the Medal of Vermeil in 2009, and Professor Ivan Pinto Diaz Accounting Finance and Control Award and the Goldman Sachs Global Leaders Award in 2003. Before joining the Foreign Service, he was a private equity analyst at Blackstone Group and a consultant as Booz Allen and Hamilton. And with this impressive background, I would like to call upon Flavio to take the stage, and please help me welcome Flavio.
Sorry, Krap. Boa tarde, Bárbara, Luisa, my colleagues from Brazil. Thank you, everybody, for turning out this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and of course, I must start by thank you, Kung Glenn, for hosting me at this wonderful campus of Assumption University. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here and to share this afternoon with you and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about Brazil. And I think the topic that was assigned to me today was trade and investment possibility for Thailand in Brazil. But I'll take advantage of the hospitality of my host, and of course I'll talk about Brazil, I'll talk about Thailand, but I also, since you're all MBA graduate students, I will use you to share my brain ideas on some issues that I think should be quite interesting for us to discuss. So I would like to keep this rather informal. I will go through the presentation. Since I see there are lots of foreign students, feel free to interrupt me. The Thais that usually don't interrupt, feel free to interrupt me as well. This is more like a dialogue than a presentation. I think, especially at the graduate level, the dialogue is the best way to the learning experience and for my own learning experience. So I'm here to also learn with you, and of course with Glenn. And having said that, yes? Olá, tudo bem? Bem-vindo. Oh.
Tem mais brasileiro aqui?
Bárbara, Luisa.
Tem mais gente?
Isso, somos três.
Temos que dar uma assistência.
Obrigadíssimo. Obrigado, Rafael. So, I divided the presentation on three main points. First, Brazil, a scenario and outlook. I'm sure most of you are at least minimally acquainted with Brazil, but I'd like to go a little bit more in depth about our recent history and our current situation and what to expect for the next few years. Then I'd like to discuss our partnership with Thailand and Brazil-Thailand partnership, and at the end talk a little bit about the future. And I'm starting to feel that I'm from a generation that it's already hard to grasp how the future will look like. So I think many of you are in a much better position to help me out on trying to imagine where the world will be tomorrow. So let's do this exercise together, and I think we can come out with very fruitful ideas from this. Before I start, I'd like to ask you, besides, of course, Rafael, Bárbara, and Luisa, have anybody visited Brazil before? On the audience? Okay, so. No? So it's a good opportunity for you to come and visit in the near future. I hope to convince you as well that it's worth your time. So starting with the scenario and outlook. So everybody knows that Brazil is quite a big country, but let's put some numbers to back it up. Brazil is the only of three countries that combines three different groups of very large numbers. So only Brazil, the United States, and China are simultaneously at three groups. Surface, more than 5 million kilometers squared. Population of more than 150 million people. And a nominal GDP of more than $1.4 trillion. So what does it mean? That Brazil is one of the top 10 economies in the world. We performed best in the past. 2012 was our best position. By then, we were the 6th economy in the world. Nowadays, we are the 8th. So still pretty good, top 10. One of the largest developing countries. I think on the top 10 group nowadays, we are in nominals. It's only China, Brazil, and India. And of course, if you get purchase power parity, then you can factor in Indonesia as well. But so we are pretty much in the front of the pack when it comes to economy, and also a very, very large population. And this has deep implications on the model that's used for our endogenous growth that I'll discuss with you further on. And a very big surface. And likely some countries, like for example Russia, which has a very, very large surface, but most of it is in Siberia. Ourselves, we are mostly at the tropical zone, so lots of it are agricultural lands, and of course large extensions of land also brings lots of natural resources. So I think this is also a very important factor. When you put in purchase power parity, it's nice to compare. That graph compares the size of different economies, but also the size of some blocks. So if you see Brazil plays in UNASUR, which is the South American group of countries, a similar whole that actually half of the block is probably Brazilian economy, which would be equivalent as Russia's in Eastern Europe, and then about the South America is about the size of ASEAN, just as a matter of comparison. And it's interesting by looking at this graph, because if you take South America and ASEAN together, you are about the size of either the United States and China. So this is one important point for us. Why it's important for us to cooperate? Well, in our world where you have many different power players acting nowadays, it's not a bipolar world anymore, right? It's a multipolar, lots of different sources of influence. If you get Asian plus UNASUR, you can basically counterbalance economically much larger blocks than like the United States or China, much larger than India, Japan, the main European Union countries. So the world is a different place, and I think Brazil is very well placed nowadays to take a leading role. And of course, I think ASEAN is also a place of vibrant dynamics. And when we come down to discuss the future later on the presentation, I think we'll touch on these issues a little bit further. But well, wealth is of course important in gross terms, but a thing that has been observed in Brazil for the past maybe 2 to 3 decades is also the idea of social inclusion, and in a movement similar to what happened in Thailand more recently. So nowadays Brazil is considered an upper middle income country. We have a yearly per capita GDP of about close to $12,000. As you can see, it's higher than the world average and higher than other very large developing countries. So we have higher than China, more than double Thailand GDP per capita, and well, about 10 times the per capita GDP of India. So it's not only a big economy, but it's a more balanced economy in some sort of way. And this, of course, if you get per capita GDP, you basically just divide the GDP by the number of people, so it may be not a very good indicator. But then a better indicator probably is the number of people in different income classes. As you can see, steadily from, well, the letter is a little small, but that's 1992 to 2014, so more or less 20 years. The red one down below is D and E classes, which means the poor. It has shrunk from about 93 million to 49 million. And then you see the upper classes. C class is like middle class, A and B, higher classes. So that's probably 3/4 of the country nowadays, about almost 140 million people. So we started in 20 years ago with maybe 53 million people in middle class, upper class, and now we have 3 times as much in 20 years. So I think this is a better indicator of economic development than just to see how much our GDP has grown for the past 20 years. And Brazil, we usually have steady GDP growth, but it's nothing compared to China, because China is like 11% a year. Brazil, on the heyday, it's usually grew up at 7% a year. But sometimes it's better to grow a little bit less and distribute more, because this is a more sustainable kind of growth. So we can come back to that later on as well. But it's also another interesting fact about Brazil. And this is also an important point that I'd like to discuss with you. Most of this social inclusion, and of course we observe for the past 10 years a sharp drop in poverty rates. So those are the percentage of Brazilian households below the poverty criteria by the United Nations. So 20 years ago it was 25% of the country. Nowadays only 10% of the country. That reflects in a growing middle class. And of course, growing middle class means more consumption. And Brazil is a consumption-driven market. Most of what we produce is for our own internal consumption. So if you come and see Brazil in terms of international trade, we trade, our trade flow is more or less $350 billion a year, which is it's quite a lot. But if you see the size of the economy, which is $1.8 trillion, that's less than 20%. So it's still a very small percentual number of the potential of foreign trade. So we are still very much resort on domestic consumption for our economic dynamism, which is good in a way because it makes us more resilient to international crises. And the same slide I used a lot after the 2008 crisis when you're saying, well, you know, the world is shaken by the international financial crisis, but it doesn't affect Brazil as much because we are much more driven by consumption. But nowadays, I will flip the coin a little bit and see that it's a blessing in one way, but it's also a curse on the other way. And why is that? There is only a certain degree where you can grow based on consumption. You know, you can grow based on consumption, or you can grow based on investment. And Brazil has resorted very heavily on a consumption-driven growth. And there are lots of analysts that thinks to access that this consumption-based model is coming, not to exhaustion, because exhaustion is too strong of a word, but maybe waning down and is slowing. And then, of course, if Brazil doesn't transition to a kind of more mixed balance of consumption and investment, then it will face more structural kind of slowdown. Which is kind of interesting if you see on this way. It's kind of the opposite of what happens to China. China has an investment-driven growth model, so lots of investments by the government, lots of investment by the state-owned enterprise, but historically still very low consumption levels. So now what the Chinese government is trying to do? Well, you are raising income levels for people, more disposable incomes, so Chinese are consuming more and much more. So you're shifting from an investment-based model to a more consumption-based model. Brazil needs to do the opposite. We need to shift from the consumption-based model a little bit more to an investment-based model. But nonetheless, it's good to have a cushion, a very big domestic market. And as you can see, Brazil by 2020 will be the 5th largest consumption markets in the world, after United States, China, Japan, and Germany. It's estimated in about $1.8 trillion, which is about the size of the Brazilian's own economy nowadays. So lots of potentials to resort on that, but still a yellow light on how structural changes should be done to keep a good level of economic development to the future. Well, one exception maybe on what I've just said, that Brazil mainly resorts on its economic, in its domestic market for its economic development, is our agribusiness sector. This is an interesting sector because this is our main export. Is the sector that has the most export profile, let's say. And why is that? So agribusiness in Brazil accounts for more or less 20% of the economy, but it accounts for almost half of the total exports. So the weight that it has on the exports is much higher than the weight it has on overall economy. And if you see the graph to the right, you can see the orange one is the amount of each product that's exported. So 95% of all the orange juice produced in Brazil is exported. Only 5% is domestically consumed. And soybeans, 76% exported, and it's our main export product to Thailand. We'll get into that later. And then you can see lots of the products are, more than half of it are exported. So agribusiness is a good example of how we also have important international trade dimension, not only domestic consumption. And it's interesting because Brazil, although we will see later, we have a very diversified economic basis. And our main sector is services sectors. It's not even manufacturing or agribusiness primary sector, it's services. But because in our export profile, we resort, almost half of it is based on agricultural products, you are still classified as a commodity country in a way. So it's kind of misleading if you think of Brazil just as a commodity powerhouse, because our economy is much more diversified than that. But on the other hand, it's good that we have this sector very well developed because it it gives us a more international dimension. So this is a way of internationalization for Brazil, as putting lots of products in the international marketplace. And this is one point where Brazil and Thailand, we can cooperate a lot, and we'll discuss it more when I talk about Brazil and Thailand specifically. But last year we had the visit of our Minister of Agriculture of Brazil to Thailand, and then the Thai Ministry General Chachai told him, well, Thailand wants to be the kitchen of the world, and Brazil, in a way, already is the kitchen of the world for many different products, so we can definitely cooperate on that. And just to prove what I'm saying with some figures, if you get products on the left table, basically I say it's the rank on production and export. So Brazil is the main producer of sugar in the world and the main exporter. Thailand ranks the second, for the matter. Main producer of coffee, main exporter of coffee, main producer and exporter of orange juice. Second largest producer of soybean, but the main exporter. Well, and then you can go beef, chicken, maize, all top two, top three producer and exporter. So very strong agricultural sector. Of course, everything has the upside and the downside. The downside is we are a little bit vulnerable to commodity cycles, and this is one of the reasons for the cyclical slowdown after international markets starting to get a little bit less heated, less demand from China, then our exports goes down, the whole economy goes down a little bit. But of course, some sorts of exposure is natural, and still we have very good, strong basis on this one. But well, not only agriculture happens to be in Brazil, as I said. Maybe for exports, it accounts for maybe half of our exports. So it's very important internationally, but our main sector domestically is services. And, of course, manufacturing. And this is just to illustrate, actually one of the most important sectors in Brazil is banking, so that's why you have the big buildings over there. And as a matter of fact, on the top 500 companies in the world, we have 5 Brazilian companies, 3 of them are banks. So very, very large banks, and the other 2 is Petrobras, oil, and Vale, which is mining. So you have 1 for oil and gas, 1 for mining, and 3 banks. Probably banking is actually one of the most important sectors in Brazil, not only agriculture. And this reflects also in the maturity of our capital markets. If you take investment portfolio in Brazil, it ranges nowadays in exchange rates about $2 trillion of portfolio investments, which is a lot. It's actually larger than our GDP. So maybe we have 120% of GDP in portfolio investments, which means like a very, very mature and large capital market. And that's very diversified, maybe 30% government bonds, 20% private bonds, maybe 30% equity. So it's across the board, so financially very solid. I put the defense sector because it's kind of funny. Brazil actually has a very large defense industry. That's the Astros missile launch. We are a very Pacific country, but our defense industry is very well developed, as is our air and space industry as well. Embraer is the 3rd largest aircraft manufacturer in the world, and the largest for the regional segments, so shorter haul kind of aircrafts. So you have, of course, Boeing and Airbus are the 2 larger ones, but then the 3rd is Embraer, which is a very high technology Brazilian company. And then we have Petrobras, which is the leader for offshore drilling, so one of the top oil companies in the world, but it's very distinctive because it's number 1 by a magnitude of many, many numbers in the super deep water drilling. So maybe Brazil, for super deep water, maybe 80% of all the drilling worldwide comes from Brazil. And for deep water, probably close to half of it. So Angola is the largest, but Brazil comes second. So lots of expertise in offshore drilling. It's also interesting because PTT, the Thai company, has a minority stake at one of our offshore drilling explorations, and they don't do it for commercial profitability alone. I had the chance to talk to the CEO of PTT, and they said, no, it's important for us to have a minority stake there because there is where the state-of-the-art of offshore drilling technology is. So if you have, they have 35% of a consortium to explore an oil block off the coast of of Brazil, in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's important for them to be there because there is where the highest technology is being developed. And actually, when you had the oil spill in the United States, the ExxonMobil oil spill back in 2010, lots of the efforts to clean up the spilling came also from our offshore drilling companies. We dispatched a whole fleet of vessels. So it's very well developed sector as well. Of course, on the other side, we have Havaianas. It's probably one of the most known Brazilian brands worldwide. But I didn't put it only because of flip-flops, but also because we have a very powerful creativity industry and fashion industry. So we have many other brands. Probably you've heard about Brazilian Bikini, right, for girls. Well, and for boys, even better. And, Brazilian blowouts, the hair. So especially when you come to cosmetics, beauty section, but also fashion, creativity, it's a very, very strong market. And, put the Olympic Games 2016. Tourism is still kind of a lagging sector. We receive it. When we are in Thailand, it's really hard to talk about tourism because Thailand is such a well-developed country in it. But Brazil receives not that much of foreign tourists yet, maybe 6 million a year, which is very low compared to Thailand, which is like nearing 40 million. But still, it's an important sector, and it also reflects our services industry, because even if you don't attract so much international tourists, considering that the country has 205 million people, there are lots of internal tourism as well. And tourism not limited to people that are traveling, but also to hospitality industry. So if you get like the restaurant industry in Brazil, it's thriving. You have like fantastic chefs, fantastic cuisine. So it's also a very important side of our culture and of our economy. One thing that I would also like to call your attention to is Brazil has a very distinctive energy profile, which I think it's interesting to note, because we are one of the cleaner countries in the world when it comes to energy. Lots of it comes from renewable sources. So this is the total energy matrix. It's not only electricity. If you only take power generation electricity, 90% comes from hydropower. So 90% is fully renewable. It comes just from hydropower dams. But this is also includes transportation, which is one of the main consumers of energy nowadays. And still, almost half of it are considered renewable sources. And 28.2 comes from the called agri-energy, which is basically renewable fuels and ethanol. So you see 17% comes from sugarcane, and this is something that I know the government of Thailand is looking very carefully at, also to develop an ethanol-based energy matrix. And we are now transitioning to second-generation biofuels, which doesn't only process the sugarcane, but actually breaks the cellulose that is inside the inputs. So it's an even more efficient method. So it's very good because, especially nowadays when we're talking about climate change, and Glenn mentioned President Trump, the United States just withdrew from the Paris Accords, maybe this week or last week. So I think it's very good, and this is one approach that I think is very sustainable for the environmental perspective, because it's not only, let's slow down economic growth or economic production. No, let's shift the whole energetic matrix to something that's more sustainable, and actually you can keep economic growth, but then in a basket of more balanced ways of sources of energy. Okay, and this is the top slide, because I've been talking great things about Brazil, but you're MBA students, you're graduate students, so I'm not here to try to fool you. Everybody that read the newspapers, Brazil is going through a big political turmoil nowadays. So I won't pretend it doesn't exist, and I'll discuss this with you on this slide. So I will spend a lot of time on these slides, but the bottom line of my message will be probably we are past the worst, and now brighter days will come. But so just a little background. Brazil was having a fantastic growth. It was the poster child of economic development. People were even saying, Brazil shouldn't be treated as a developing country anymore. It should be already on the developed country leagues, which is kind of something that never been to Brazil would say that, because still you cannot compare Brazil to a fully developed country. But still, that was kind of the animal spirits that were going on by saying that Brazil were doing really great and it's a really great country. But then, of course, lots of economic fundamentals starting going a little bit derailed, and most of them I already touched. For example, we resorted too much on a consumption-driven model, then we have to shift for investment. These things doesn't happen automatically, you know? If you need to build infrastructure, it won't be in 1 year, it won't be in 5 years, it will be in 10, 20 years. If you need to build roads, if you need to build a new power grid, it will take time. And these kind of structural changes had to start to be done. But this implies, obviously, at least a kind of a slowdown to do some structural changes. And then we enter in this stage. Coupled with that, we had an international slowdown, and then it started to pick up. But then when it hit, we were already on the downward turn. And probably the icing on the cake was the whole political situation in Brazil, which actually started for a very good and noble reason. We started to do very thorough corruption probes on many, many high-level politicians. So they have this huge joint operation by Federal Police of Brazil, the prosecutors, which is called Operação Lava Jato, car wash. It's all started in a car wash in Brasilia that gets bribery from politicians. That's why it's called car wash. And from one small car wash in Brasilia, it's basically took to the impeachment of our former president. Our current president may be impeached or not, we don't know. So lots of political instabilities. And this pretty much is bad because it puts the country a little bit on hold because, well, when you're discussing if the guy will be president tomorrow, people won't be doing investment commitments because they want to have a more certainty of scenario. So there are lots of negative spillovers from the political situation into the economic situation. But this will come to a convergence because we'll have one way or the other, there is no escape. We will have general elections by the end of next year. So as we get closer to the end of 2018, the situation will resolve itself because we'll have general elections, so it doesn't matter if the former guy gets impeached or not, it will necessarily change. And, well, Brazilians are very resilient, and this has been a very, very test-proof for our democratic institutions. And the basic fact that despite all of the mess that is going on. The democratic institutions are holding, and still have a Supreme Court operating. You have prosecutors prosecuting presidents or high-level ministers. This proves that the country has really matured to a level where society and the institutions are bigger than individual politicians. So in a way, it's kind of a painful medicine, you know. It has a bitter taste, and it has caused lots of damage. But as I see it, and as I think most of the Brazilians see it, it's a necessary step that you have to make to get in a better position in the future. So in a way, in Thailand too, there's lots of talks about corruption. And I think in this sense, we both share the sense of urgency and importance of getting rid of bad practice. If it's going to hurt the economy, it's going to hurt the economy. Well, that's the fact. But afterwards, the economy will recover, and actually it's already recovering. So these are data from the last IMF economic outlook. It was released in April, so May. So it's 2 months old, so it's very, very, very fresh. It's the freshest data as you can get. And as you can see, well, it's not brilliant, but it's looking good, the trend. Real GDP, we shrunk for the past, well, in 2014, basically, we didn't do anything. It was 0%. Then we shrunk 3.8 2015, 3.6 in 2016. But then, starting this year, it will pick up again. And starting modestly at 0.2, next year 1.7, and the long-term convergence will be in the middle of between 2 and 3%, which is kind of a good historic, solid average for Brazil when it's at kind of a steady growth. Not like brilliant, very fast growth, but it's a good base level. One very important thing is inflation is actually on the downward trends. So there are lots of expectations since it will be kept at very low thresholds, right at the targets, our inflation targets, 4.4, 4.3, it's right in the middle of the band of the range for the inflation. This allows for our monetary authority to do some quantitative easing policies, like the US did right after 2018 when they had the big crisis. They started doing quantitative easing, which is basically heating up the economy, pouring some money on it. And of course, there is the danger of getting high inflation. But since inflation is in control, our monetary authority, our central bank, has much more flexibility to start doing quantitative easing policies. So we can really affect the real side of the economy from now on. We can pour more money in the market, make it a little bit more heated, and then this will start production again, and economic activity will start to pick up. Unemployment, it's much higher than it was in the past. We bottomed at 4.3%, maybe 5 years ago. It really hiked with the crisis, but at least it's not on the upward trends. It's like it will have a spike, but then it will go down again, and it will be in the around 10%, which is high for what we wish, but if you go and take other countries as comparison, if you go to Europe, it will be more than double of that. It's a reality we can live with, I guess. Consumption really dropped. It starts to pick up again. As I said, Brazil is a consumption-driven country, so consumption pickups, economy will necessarily follows. And then, probably even more important, investment probably will pick up again. And then you can see a hike in 2019. And this is the first year after general elections. So this also reflects the general feeling that after you get a more definite political situation, there will be room for investments to resume, and we have a steady $60 billion a year of foreign direct investments, so this trend will probably continue. And also our trade balance will probably recover, that's in $1 billion, and then we'll get our usual surplus of around $50 billion a year, which is very good because then we can get our current accounts in order, service our debts. So the fundamentals looks quite solid. As Bill Clinton said, it's the economy still. The economy looks good, but it's not only the economy. Now you have to solve the political situation, but then, once again, this is an important step to make, and after we done it, if you get the fundamentals, and then I also expressed, we have mature capital markets, diversified economic basis, we have a solid powerhouse in agribusiness for exports, a very efficient energetic matrix, so you name it, there is no way it can go wrong. Well, there is always a way for it to go wrong, but then we have to really, really try hard. And I think, actually, people really tried hard to make it go wrong, but it wasn't possible. Institutions hold. Brazilians are very resilient, so we are coming out of this. And then, of course, where can Brazil and Thailand play a role together in this new world? As you can see, our trade relationship is really growing. The green line, it's from 2000 to nowadays, so probably around the last 20 years. Our flow multiplied by a factor of maybe 15 times what it was in 2000 is our trade flow in 2016. It's the last available data. And it's a very balanced, as you can see, exports and imports. This is from Brazil, so exports from Brazil into Thailand and imports from Thailand to Brazil. They go on a very harmonic trend. So it's good. Trade is it's even better when it's balanced. It's not good to have like a huge surplus or a huge deficit. So this reflects a healthy relation. When you get into the profile exports, then you have a little bit more to worry about. As you can see, the main Brazil exports are still from our commodities, which is not surprising since most of our exports, like half of it, comes from the agricultural sector. So the big chunk, 72%, is soybeans. Then you have leather, cotton, and then residual. This can be shifted in the future, I think, and I will discuss more when we talk about the future, the possibilities of integrating global value chains. We've probably been talking lots about these, GVCs, in the MBA level. So I think that there is room for much, much more improvement when it comes to imports and exports profiles. And when the other way around, Thailand exports to Brazil, we have lots of auto parts, because there are a lot of Japanese car makers in Brazil. There are lots of Japanese car makers in Thailand. They do lots of parts. They export intra-company from Thailand to Brazil. So, for example, Mitsubishi, their truck that they make here is the one that they sell in Brazil. Same truck. No, please. Oh, okay, water. and electronics too. Lots of parts are produced in Thailand and assembled in Brazil. So I think Thailand exports to Brazil, the profile is actually better than the Brazilian exports to Thailand as it is today. But nonetheless, the volume is also an important factor, and Brazil is the first partner in Latin America for Thailand. Thailand is the second partner for Brazil in ASEAN, behind Singapore. But of course, when you talk about Singapore, it's lots of trades that go to Singapore actually triangulates to other destinations. So if we could take a look at this and see exports as final destinations and not accounting for intermediate countries and triangulation, maybe Thailand would still be in front of Singapore, because historically Thailand has been number one in ASEAN. But well, top two, still very solid. And when we are talking about Brazil in Latin America, Brazil's economy is half of Latin America. So it will be very hard to be in any other way. You can have, of course, strong relationships with Mexico, strong relationships with Peru, strong relationships with Argentina. They're all big countries, but all of them together are the size of Brazil. So it will be practically impossible to make a shift on this position of being the first partner in Latin America. So it's a given reality, and then I think we need to better explore it. But well, trade has been a kind of constant development, but maybe the most important new feature between Thailand and Brazil relations is when it comes down to investment. And this reflects very, very, very recent trends. These are not investments that are around for a long time. And I may say that all of these investments occurred maybe in the past 10 years for sure, maybe even in the past 5 years. So I think these are good examples. I will discuss a little bit of each one and to show how better Brazil and Thailand can partner together. First one is Minor Hotel Group. Glenn told me that you have a PhD program in tourism management here at Assumption, and also an MBA in tourism, right? So, of course, everybody knows tourism is a very important economic sector, especially when it comes into Thailand. And you have Minor Group, which is the controlling group for Anantara and other brands in Brazil. They operate under the Tivoli brand. And Minor is already operating for very, very big flagship hotels in Brazil, in São Paulo, Salvador, I think either Fortaleza or Recife, but one important city in the Northeast, and Brasilia, the capital city. And these are not like small operations. There are very big hotels, like 5 stars, big resorts, and they are implementing lots of Thai expertise into it. They're putting Anantara Spa in São Paulo. It's just opened this year. They're creating a rooftop bar in São Paulo, which is not that common as it is in Bangkok. They're bringing some like Asian flavors to it. So it's really interesting because they're bringing kind of the exotic for Brazil, which is the Thainess concept, but it also, and I was mentioning to Glenn, last year I had the opportunity to meet with Bill Heineke, the founder of Minor Group, and I asked him, well, why have you invested in Brazil, which is great, but we don't see many Asian hotel chains investing in Brazil. And he said, well, I haven't invested for today, for tomorrow, or for 5 years. Of course, it's profitable now, it's great, but what I'm looking at is South America and Africa will be the next frontier of world tourism. And when I talk about world tourism, I'm mainly saying Chinese tourism, because, well, they are just a lot of people, right? And a lot of tourists. You could see here in Thailand how many, 20 million Chinese a year. It's a lot of people. And he says, well, Chinese, they'll travel all around Asia, they'll travel around Europe, they'll travel around the United States. They will have to find new destinations in maybe 10 years from now. And when they go to Brazil, I will have my guest services in Mandarin. I already have a footprint in the markets. I already know the marketplace. I'll know what works, what it doesn't work, and I'll be there to greet them. So the guy, that's why he's a business genius. He's already seen 10 years ahead, and I think, well, I can only admire and hope that, well, since you're an MBA student, I'm sure lots of you share this same thing of strategic view, and I'm just wanting to give you some facts and maybe try to think outside the box and see, well, how Brazil, even if it's so far and like most of you have never set foot there, but well, there are lots of opportunities there, and it's a huge country and still lots of potentials to get closer ties with Asian countries, and I think that's where the future will lie. And I've already talked a little bit about PTTP, another great example. Well, what Brazil does great? Well, offshore drilling. We are the best in the world. So you can go to Germany or you can go to the United States. They don't do it better than us. Brazil is the one that does it best, period. And then, well, PTTP, great company, smart guys, said, well, let's buy a stake, minority stake. We don't need to spend it's a lot of money because it's oil drilling, right? Everything's a lot of money. But still, it's not like 100%. They got into a consortium, but they have the footprints there. They are acquainted with state-of-the-art technology. They are drilling oil in the Atlantic Ocean. So very profitable, but not only profitable, but strategic. And I think that's the key. When you are doing this sort of business at this very high level, you're not only thinking about your today's margin or your immediate profitability. You're really looking forward. How can this strategically impact my company, right? And these guys are doing it, and that's what I find. I had a luncheon with the CEO of Big C, and I was saying, I love to talk about this because this all can turn out into Harvard business cases where you study and see, wow, these guys are genius and this makes perfect sense. So these cases are really interesting. Well, on the other side, a Brazilian company investing in Thailand, BRF, another genius case. And the CEO, Pedro Faria, came from the financial market and he came to Thailand to inaugurate this operation. Also, he shared his knowledge with me and I'll share it with you. He said, well, BRF is the largest exporter of poultry in the world. The company itself exports between 12 to 21% of all the poultry exported in the world. It's one single company, which is this Brazilian company, BRF. But they were competing with Thai companies in some markets, Japan and Middle East. And I said, well, why are we competing? They are better positioned. They are already in Asia. The logistics are much easier. So instead of us trying to open a competing facility over there, let's see possibilities for acquisition. And that's what they did. And actually, they concluded an acquisition operation in January last year, January 2016. $360 million. It's the largest Brazilian investment to date in Thailand. So, well, it's hard to be surpassed. It's 1/3 of $1 billion. And they bought the third largest poultry producer in Thailand, which back then was called Golden Foods Siam. Now it's called BRF. And it's the largest buyable company because the largest, of course, is CP Group, which is impossible to buy. And the second one is Betagro, which is a multinational company, so it doesn't make much sense neither. But the third one was Gold Food Siam, and BRF, the Brazilian company, actually bought it. And what did they do? So this company that they bought were competing with them in Middle East and Japan. They said, no, we already serve these markets. Let's shift our production where we are not. Which markets are we not serving? Well, ASEAN markets. Let's do it. Thailand is a member of the ASEAN Economic Community. Even if the company is Brazilian, the production line is Thai. So the products are exported as Thai products, not Brazilian products. So they shifted the exports from markets where they were competitors to markets where there are new entrants. And that's the beauty of it. So they not only created new markets, but they also got larger market shares in markets that they were already operating. So the synergy was obvious, and the multiplying effect of it was quite immediate. And now they have about 10,000 employees in Thailand, and I think their first year of operation, they grew up like 40%. So another success case. Sinha is a nice one too. Brazilians love beer. Brazilian loves craft beer. Sinha is exotic in Brazil, right? And so they are having huge success on putting Sinha in the Brazilian market. You should say just Sin, right? It's a program. But Sin beer in the Brazilian market. But what's nice about it, it's just not about selling beer. They are selling Thailand as well. So they are doing marketing at supermarkets with people dressed in Thai costumes, and they put satay and they approach it to Brazilian barbecue. So they are finding a common ground on traditions and cultural heritage that it makes at the same time both a flavor of familiarity, but also a flavor of the exotic. So even if Sin beer here is a totally retail product, it's not considered like a craft product at all or a premium product. In Brazil, it's is now considered a very aspirational product in a way that it resembles like something that is both exotic and familiar at the same time. So it all came down to their marketing strategy, which was a very, very successful marketing strategy in Brazil. So another way, it's not only about, let's sell Sim beer in Brazil. You really need to come up with a story to back it up, you know. And if you do it right, you make profits out of it, and it will be strategically relevant for your company. So I think another lessons that we can learn from this example. And Qualcomm is interesting because it's a Taiwanese Thai company. They produce electronic parts in a Brazil special economic zone in the Amazon forest region. So it's really interesting. Actually, the largest number of Thais living in Brazil lives in the Amazon jungle because of this company, because they have like 3 huge assembly facilities over there. And this also connects to the idea of integrating supply chains. They produce components there that are then re-exported to Taiwan and to China and to Thailand. So it's not part of a Brazilian operation, it's part of a global operation. And well, last but not the least, IESA and Queiroz Galvão, they are operating Rayong. It's a Brazilian consortium, and they build oil drilling platforms. Not for Thailand. They build it in Rayong and they ship it to China and Australia. So another great example. Lots of Brazilian technicians coming here, taking advantage of a better location, better incentives, and reselling it to regional partners. And I think the next step for Brazil and Thailand to get close together is just building up our awareness. And this is one of the main reasons I'm delighted to be here and talking to you, because hopefully I'm bringing to you facts that you didn't know before, and maybe you didn't know that Sim beer is in Brazil, or you didn't know that most of the chicken exported from Thailand nowadays actually are from a Brazilian company. And for us to get to know each other, it's really important, especially, well, you know you have globalization, but cultures are different, and we have to make an effort to better understand each other. And as Glenn said, of course, I think cooperation with higher education institutions is key, because you'll be the leaders of the future. We'll be the Bill Heinkes and the CEOs of PTT and CEOs of Minor Group and whatever. So when you're sitting on the chair and making strategic decisions, then maybe you'll be a little bit more aware of opportunities in Brazil. Just like illustrate these slides, Brazil is very honored because we had the chance to host all the members of the royal family in Brazil at any given point in time. So it's just more like an interesting story. Princess Chulalongkorn went to Brazil as the special representative of His Majesty King Bhumibol in 2012 for Rio Plus 20 United Nations Summit in Rio de Janeiro. So there she is in Rio. Down below you have Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sirithorn, who you probably all know. She's a very accomplished photographer, and she went in a trip to Brazil last year to take photographs, and this was an exhibit. The result is this exhibition. She's over there on the screen talking about it. It was at Bangkok Arts and Culture Center, BACC. And then you see these are all her pictures. And, well, the current king, Rama X, His Majesty King Vajiralongkorn, he went to Brazil back in 1993. That's a newspaper from the period reporting on his visit to Embraer. As you probably know, His Majesty's accomplished pilot, you know, and an Air Force military alumnus. And of course, he visited Embraer, and he actually flew by himself Embraer jets. And legend says that he loved them. So it's good if His Majesty likes the planes. I'm sure they are good planes. And then, talking about the future. So, I've talked a lot about how Brazil is, how Thailand is today, but what's next? What will be in the future? And you know, Luisa went to, my colleague from the embassy, went to an event about higher education. And probably, Glenn, you are also aware of this, but basically on that event, the discussion came down to this. Most of the jobs of the future haven't even been created nowadays. You know? So you are here studying business, but in 50 years from now, most of the jobs won't be for business managers, or 65%. So thank you for a few. So businessmen will be this remaining 35%, lawyers, engineers, of them will be residual. The bulk we don't know yet. It's the future, right? So how can you prepare for that? It's a really hard task. So that's why I'm stressing this, like thinking outside the box, think strategically, like how can Brazil and Thailand work together? These are not obvious things, but this is what the human mind needs to exercise, because otherwise, if you're just saying, oh, let me know how to use Excel spreadsheets, it's great, I love Excel spreadsheet, but it's like in 10 years, a computer will do it, I don't know, maybe a robot will do it. I have no idea how the future will look like. So we need to be prepared. And then I will get into a much more conceptual kind of discussion with you, and just feed for thoughts. And I talked a lot about hard figures, how Brazil evolved still today, and how Thailand has evolved, and how can we maybe partner. But let's talk about more abstract stuff. So this is covers of Economist magazines, different points in time. And this, I really like this slide because it reflects this market perception, these animal spirits. So this one is around 2009. I think Brazil takes off. It's great. The country is doing fantastic. Then that's like 3 years later, Brazil blew it. The country is sinking. And that's the great deceleration, like BRICS countries. They're all like slugging the mud. India is behind. I think Brazil is there. China is kind of better, but doing terrible too. And this just reflects that market perceptions change really, really quickly. So in maybe 5 years, you change it from taking off to blowing it. And, you know, even people don't change that much in 5 years. You can imagine like a country. So if Brazil was good in 2010, it cannot suck completely in 2014. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's why you say like markets, they have the animal spirits. But basically, there are not that many rationality in economics. You can tell it is. Well, Glenn mentioned to you my PhD is in behavioral sciences and more specifically in behavioral econometrics. And basically, the state of the art of economic theory nowadays is just to disprove the rationality theory. You know, rationality works on ideal scenario, but the world is far from the ideal. But why I'm saying that? I'm saying that because the market's perceptions are not as important as the market fundamentals. And even if you say the BRICS countries are sluggish, actually the fundamentals show that in the future they will play a much larger role than they are playing today. So you can argue that, okay, the United States will regain its position in the forefront of the world economy, or Europe will recover. But these are IMF data, and basically they are saying, is the BRICS slow down for good? It's a structural shift and these countries won't fly anymore? Or the future will have the BRICS? And BRICS, just to make it completely clear, it was an acronym originally created by Jing O'Neill from Goldman Sachs, and it's really stuck, and now we even have a formal group called the BRICS of these countries. But it all came down from investment banking, and they said these are the countries that will dominate the economy in the future. So going back, that's probably the taking off cover, right? So, it's great, they'll take over. And now they said, no, the BRICS are done. You know, China is slowing down, Brazil is in a mess, Russia is terrible, South Africa is too small, but maybe India is a little bit better, but so they won't work. But actually, it's like the middle way, right? It's not like we won't be ruling the world tomorrow, but it's not like we won't be relevant at all in the future. It will be more balanced. And you know, the IMF estimates that all BRIC countries are operating nowadays below the long-term output potential. So if you studied development economics, Solow model, convergence, you're still far below from steady states, from convergence. There's still lots of gaps to close in terms of productivity and output. And of this group, Brazil and India are the current countries that have the largest output gap. So at least 1 to 2% below their potential. So of these countries, Brazil and India in the long run will grow even more. But still, China, Russia, and South Africa, they have a gap of about 0.5% of potential, still below full potential. So still lots of room to grow. So according to the IMF, only China and Russia will experience a steady slowdown on the long-term output growth path. But China and Russia are still quite big, and even a slowdown for them are still very high growth rates. So basically, when it came out of this cycle, Brazil went through a very strong recession that we already discussed. BRICS, I think they won't be part of the great deceleration at all. You know, they will pick up again and they will converge. And you cannot talk about the future without talking about these countries. And of course, I'm talking about the BRICS because they are very, very continental countries. But I can put maybe a BRICSA and put ASEAN at the end. And then, of course, you cannot ignore it. You know, Thailand will grow, Indonesia will grow, other countries will grow even more. Vietnam is growing a lot. You know, Myanmar, now it's opening up. So this will all shift. And of course, Asia will be the new center of the world when it comes down to the economy. And this is a graph that I like it very much. I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. It comes from Professor Danny Quah paper on the shifting of the world's center of gravity. And of gravity, he means economic gravity. And it's a very, very strong paper. When Glenn mentioned I studied at the London School of Economics, and my professor at London School of Economics back in 2004, so 13 years ago, many, many years ago, was Professor Danny Quah, and he's probably one of the best econometrics geniuses that there are. It's as good as it gets. And if he did an econometric study saying that this will happen, 99% of chance that this will happen. You know, so in the 80s, it was on the Atlantic Ocean, and it's shifting, shifting, shifting. Nowadays, we are over there, a little bit over the Middle East, and by 2045, it will be right over China, well, right over Thailand, right? If you shift it down to the south a little bit. You know? So what does it mean? That, well, you cannot ignore the BRICS, but you cannot ignore Asia. Asia is where the future will be. And it's not an excuse to say that we are geographically far apart. It's a big BS, you know, because it probably would make sense in the maybe 16th century, but not even so. In 16th century, you had like the Portuguese sailing around, and they were here in Ayutthaya already. So you cannot use that as an excuse. I think the main impairing factor is not logistics. The main impairing factor is still we are not acquainted with each other's cultures, with each other's ways of lives, with others' views of the world. But this, I think, look at how international this class is. This will get diluted as time passes by, and maybe by 2045, Asia will be as present as in Brazil as it is in Asia, and maybe Brazil will be as present in Thailand as it is in South America, hopefully, right? And then there will be a much smaller place. But I think these are two unavoidable trends. You know, emerging like the big developing countries will emerge one way or the other, and Asia will be the new center of the world. So let's combine these two things. Brazil is on the one side, Thailand is on the other side. Let's think together how can we make the best out of it. And then also, things will get much more complicated. Now I mentioned about GVC. GVC, as you know, is one of the hot topics, hot words, you know, very fashionable, global value chains. Nobody knows exactly what it is, but I like it because global value chains actually reflects a combination of trade, foreign direct investment, services, or put everything in the basket, you know. When Glenn asked me to come and to talk about trade and investment opportunities in Brazil. Now, trade and investment are not separate anymore. They are the same. They are different parts of the same spectrum, you know. You can start with trade, and then you can evolve into investments, but companies don't think strategically of them as separate anymore. And this can go down to the very, very bare level of doing business. And I'll quote an example. In the beginning of this year, I hosted here trade delegation for cassava. So basically they plant cassava, which is not very glamorous, right? We're talking about like high strategy of hospitality and like oil drilling. No, but these guys grow cassava. And what happens in Brazil? In Brazil you have, it's very seasonal, the cassava crops, and basically you have very high price volatilities. So they said, okay, let's start importing cassava from Thailand. We can use it to reduce volatility, grants us a steady supply. But they said, and this will be a first step for us to get to know Thai cassava growers and suppliers, because the next step, we'll make an investment into Thailand, we'll produce starch in Thailand and then resell in the region. And then we can use the production techniques that we already use, which are more advanced than the ones that are currently used in Thailand, and boom, automatically we will be very competitive in the Thai market. So you start with trade, but you don't stop at trade. You start at trade and then you move to investment. And you move to investment in a smart way. So when you're investing, you won't do like regular cassava starch. You do modified starch. Why? Because that's the one that gets incentives from the government. So if you go to the Board of Investment of Thailand, they said, if you shift from like standard starch to modified starch, then I'll give you incentive. So again, even if you're planting cassava, you need to think strategically. And I think it's a good example. And global value chains kind of embodies this idea. It's not only trade, it's not only investment, it's a very holistic approach. And this is a reflex of the last 50 years of global trade. Because nowadays, tariffs are already very, very low. Average tariffs worldwide are on about 5%, which is quite low. And I remember when I was serving in Washington, I did an econometric study, and the result was, if you liberalize all trade in the world, take off all tariffs, probably the net gains will be around some billions dollars, which at that time was equivalent to the money, the box office of Harry Potter. So basically I said, well, you don't need to go to Geneva and discuss a lot about lowering tariffs. You just produce another Harry Potter movie and you'll make the same amount of money for the world economy. So it's probably the easier way to do it. So if you keep looking at tariffs, it's not where the future is. You know, you have to take other steps, liberalizations, and then you have like non-tariff barriers, norms and standards and trade facilitation. And now trade and investments are intertwined with many other topics like environment, employment, intellectual property, public procurement, so the landscape got much more complicated. So when you talk about trade, you are not talking about only trade anymore. You are talking about a full range of different things. And of course, investment is the natural one, but you're still talking about competition, you're talking about environment, you're talking about welfare. And then coming back to Thailand, you know, Thailand has a lot to contribute in the sense you have like sufficiency economic philosophy, you know, from His Late Majesty, King Bhumibol, which is like a very good idea, and this drinks from that as well. When you're talking about economy, it's not only the money, it's like well-being of people, sustainability, wealth distribution, many other different considerations, and the future will lie over there. And then you have to think strategically once again, and then you can still make profits and navigate well through this very complicated scenario. Oh, and coming back to that idea that the jobs of the future we still don't know. One thing that we know for sure is they probably won't be at manufacturing because robots will take care of that, you know. And this, the Stanchi-Ismail curve, you probably heard it because it's the backbone of Thailand 4.0, this whole new strategy of the government to overhaul the economy. But it's basically the idea, you cannot resort on like manufacturing anymore. You need to go back to innovation, to creativity. You need to, the largest part of the value added for the production chain is either on the conception and the research and development or at the marketing of it, and not at actually producing the goods. You know, it's designing the goods and selling the goods. Producing it won't be the future. And that's a key element to escape the very famous middle income trap, right? Because that's where Brazil and Thailand, we both are in some sort of way. And you have to escape it. And the way to escape it is more innovation, more creativity. And that's why I put mathematical sciences over there, because it's like translating pure knowledge into practical knowledge. And of course, being here in a higher education institution, I think this is the key. That's like what you learn in the classroom. You have to think about it and put your minds to analyze it and then apply it in the real world. And that's what will make a big difference. And the other graph that I put over there is it's called the hype graph. It's how technology impacts the everyday's everyday's life. And it drives from a law that's called the Amara law. It basically says that people overestimate the impact of technology in the short run, but underestimate the impact of the technology in the long run. So basically saying technology will shift the world, maybe less than what we expect it will today, but more in the long run than the past. And this takes me to my last slide. And sorry, I know I talked a lot. But at least I talk fast, right? So it's considered. But the future will be in your hands, because you'll be the guys that will be thinking strategically, either if you're working for a company or if you're having your own company. And going back again to the lunch that I have with the CEO of Big C, he said, you know, Big C, we have like 100,000 employees, but nobody wants to be an employee anymore. Everybody now wants to be their own boss, to have their own business. And this is now possible because the entrepreneurial culture is growing so much, and actually technology makes it possible. You know, another you all know him, Jack Ma from Alibaba Group. What's Alibaba? It's a platform for everybody to be in the global marketplace. You have a shop in your backyard in Shanghai, you can sell to Brazil whatever you're producing. Or you can be a designer in, I don't know, Pattaya, and you can be designing things that will be the next fashion hit in Paris. We are not limited anymore. We are just limited by ourselves. But I can be an architect and do a project here, and the building will be built. Well, I don't know, in Slovakia. It doesn't matter. These are not the barriers that exist anymore. Technology overcame them already. And even if you are not your own boss and you work for a company, the entrepreneurial culture, now it's a reality. It's not an option. Even if you work for PTT or for Minor Group or for Assumption University, and we're talking about higher education students administration, you need to be an entrepreneur. Glenn is an entrepreneur inside Assumption because he needs to pay attention. Well, how can I be the leading in my field? How can I keep good educational standards, innovating, but still making the profitable lines? And this is how I would like to end. And please think strategically, think outside the box, and think about Brazil, because Brazil will be the future, Thailand will be the future, and if we can put it together, I think we have a very bright future ahead. Thank you so much.
Flavio, you have such energy. I thank you so much. Would you like to take a couple of questions, Flavio? Yeah. So, who will go with the first question then? No questions, no. Are you sure? How about my friend from Netherlands? Would you like to think about a question? So from where are you then? France? Russia? Okay.
I don't have any questions, sorry.
Come on, then a comment.
No, really.
His comment is no comment. Okay, go ahead. My friend who is very troubled about robotics, go ahead. Come on. Tell us your name and then your question.
Yeah, my name is Adi, and my question is not a question; it's just a normal discussion. What I have read in the article or somewhere like between Thailand and Brazil relationship, people they are not much aware of their relationship. Like when Thai people are there, they don't talk about Brazil so much. They only know about the football. So, what are the steps we can take to improve the relationship between both the countries, and which will be good for the future and investment as well? So.
Okay. So I hope you got that question.
Yes, so the question is, when Thai people think about Brazil, they think about football, how can we move to something more than that? No, I think, first of all, it's great that you think about football, because I love Brazilian football, and actually I'm really happy that everybody knows it, and it's a very great asset, and thank God Brazilian football is getting good again, because it was terrible a few years ago. But it's one example of this image, because it's great to talk about football, and it's great to talk about Carnival, and I think the Olympics and the World Cup were good showcase opportunities for Brazil, but we shouldn't stop at that, and this was one of the objectives of my presentation. Say, okay, Brazil, of course, you know Neymar. Well, in Asia they say more Neymar, but well, you know the guy, right? He's great, he's fantastic. But we also do like oil drilling platforms and aircrafts, and you have actually lots of scientists and innovators, and so it's much more than that. But how to make it available to the everybody? I think it needs to build up, and it happens a little bit slowly, even for the very well-connected world. But it's shifting. Just the opportunity to come here and talking to you, I can talk a little bit more about Brazil, and maybe one or two will get curious, will look on the internet, will Google it, and then can share with their colleagues. And I think it will be like a chain reaction, and it needs to start in a way. And you know, it's really funny. Football really helps on this. We made a research a while ago, and it was the most searched keywords for Brazil. It's not Google, it's the Google that they use in China, because in China they all have different softwares, but well, on their search program in China. And probably most of it was about names of football players, so Ronaldo, Neymar, Pelé, whatever. But then one that was funny was Brazilian barbecue, because apparently Chinese love Brazilian barbecue. But this is to say that, well, we start with football, you go to barbecue, then you can go to maybe the Brazilian spirits, caipirinha, cachaça, carnival, and I think this kind of, if you go to international relations theory, it's called the soft power, right? And then you have the soft power starting it, but then you have to have a little bit more substance to back it off. So people get interested in Brazil, and countries that are closer to Brazil are much more interested nowadays than they were in the past. If you go to the United States, the interest in Brazil is huge. People are learning Portuguese a lot. It amazes me about the number of people that speaks Portuguese. And you would be surprised how many people in Thailand speaks Portuguese, and they're actually very good Portuguese. We always bump into like Thai people, and they say, "Oh, I speak a little Portuguese." I said, "Well, how come?" Right? But so I think it seems to be small at the moment, and maybe it's a little bit limited to kind of more the stereotypical views. But I think in the future, inevitably, this soft power will translate more into more substantive relations. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
Okay, let's go from India to Brazil. Okay, the second in the BRICS country. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. It was really nice to hear from my own country, Flavio. Thank you. I am a small business in Brazil. I run a Thai massage school. So what I found in Brazil that this kind of thing is very big in Brazil. People become very acquainted about Thai tradition, Thai medicine, Thai massage. So in Brazil, I live in Thailand for 3 years, but once a year I go to Brazil to teach. And every time I teach, I come back like just already thinking that I have to go back because there are so many people who needs. And and because I study Thai culture, I realized that there are so many Brazilians who likes Asian culture, like Buddhism. So because for us, it's similar a little bit from our beliefs. So I think we could explore more about what Thailand has to teach to Brazil. In other hand, Brazil has a lot as well to bring to Thailand, because even though Thai people are shy, they appreciate a lot Brazilian culture, that we have this kind of samba music, barbecue, the way we gather with friends. It's very nice. So the only thing I would say is just like Brazil embassy should bring more our culture to Thailand and bring Thai culture to Brazil too, make this a connection in order to increase the number of people that goes to Brazil, because Brazil is a huge country. So I'm from South. There is a culture that is different from North, that is different from the middle part of Brazil. So I think that would be nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. And actually, I think I could do a whole new presentation just commenting on the many, many interesting topics that Barbara has raised. So I will just pick some of them and make a brief comment. I think you're totally right about these connections that Brazilians have with Thailand and Thailand with Brazil, and this curiosity. And for you to know, Brazil, of course, we are a very big Catholic country, but our Catholic practice in Brazil is very syncretical. Or you can go to the church, but you can also practice Vipassana meditation. It's not a problem in Brazil. We don't see things as excluded, you know. And especially Theravada Buddhism, the Buddhism that you have in Thailand, it's very appealing for Brazilians, because you don't have like if you go to other Buddhist traditions, you don't need to be so strict about rituals or observances, but much more about, for example, practicing the Four Noble Truths or the 5 precepts. But these are all lots of very practical ways of doing it. And Brazilians already do it. Even if they are Catholic by heart, they will use it on their daily lives to make it better. And I think Brazilians are very spiritual people in a way, and very connected to nature, very connected to their inner selves. So I think it's a given point of contact on each. And of course, we are both very warming cultures, even if Thais are a little bit more shy than Brazilians, but I think we are very warm in a sense that we like to host, we like to talk, we like to laugh, like to have friends. So I think it's a very big point. About tourist inflows from Thailand to Brazil. So this is interesting. It all comes down on how Thais take their vacations. And because in Brazil, when we take vacations, usually we have by law 30 days of vacations a year. And then we take big chunks, at least 15 days and then 15 days. When Thais, most of the Thais take vacations, they usually take only a few days because they compute it differently. They don't have like straight 30 days, but they have some business days. And then to make the journey all the way to Brazil, it makes it very, very, very long for them to go to spend like a week, for example, because then you spend 2 days in a plane, 4 days in Brazil, 2 days again. So one thing that is being marketable nowadays is how you can go to Brazil and other places in South America, and then you have to spend more time. But then this demands a shift on the habits of vacationing of the Thais, which are not something that's super easy to shift from 1 hour to the other. So that's one of the reasons why I think like Thai inflows to Brazil as tourists is a little bit harder than, for example, Brazilian flows to Thailand, because our ways of vacationing are already a little bit different. But of course, I think as curiosity grows and as now connectivity is growing too, it's much easier to take a plane from Bangkok to São Paulo than it was in the past. Now, okay, it's still a long time, but you can do one connection in any of the Gulf countries, like you can stay just 2 hours in the ground, and then you take just 2 legs of a long flight and you're there. So it's easier and it's possible. And I think this will also help to close this gap of an exchange. And when you say about the embassy role in promoting culture, I must say I agree with you. We should do more, and we are trying to do the best that we can. But I mentioned this to Glenn before. You know, governments, we have a role, but at the end of the day, it's a limited role. We can go to a certain point, but if the private sector or the public interest doesn't follow, it will fall flat in one way or the other. So we can push it to a level, and as I use the analogy that I can preach, but a preacher with no follower has nobody to preach to, right? So we are trying to do our best, but of course, I think the best way to move forward is keep doing what we are doing, but also trying to outreach to get more people involved. And this is also an invitation, if any of you, and of course Assumption already is a great partner, but even more in the future, and even yourself personally, if we can do things together, I think that will jumpstart the chain reaction that I also mentioned in the reply to his questions. And then we can do more. But government itself, or the embassy as part of the government, we will have a very limited outreach, especially nowadays with social media, with like distinct interests. I think societies are much more participative. Oh, this is a hard word. Participative than they were in the past, and that's another big opportunity for us all to work together. And I think in the past, embassies were things that were vested with a very high authority, and diplomats who lived in these ivory towers and unreachable. I think today it's the opposite. We need to like tear down the walls, and it needs to be an open space, because embassy represents the state, and the state represents the people, right? And nowadays with technology, we can do everything together, basically. So the final answer to your question is with an invitation to everybody that wants to contribute to bring Brazil and Thailand together. Please, I give my personal assurance, and I know Luisa also shares my view, and my ambassador, of course, Gilberto, also shares the same view. We'll be open and ready to support any kind of initiative.
Flavio, on that note, I think the day of Brazil, your national day, is coming up soon or has passed by. September, right. Yeah, now I remember that. So we have, Rafael here, an architectural major from Bang Na campus. We've got Barbara here. We've got members of the BRICS countries here. My friend from Russia didn't want to make a statement, but a friend from India did. Okay, and then we have China here, right? And then South Africa, although we don't have African students involved in this group, can we think about doing something here at Assumption University to promote Brazilian culture in September? Okay? So, Barbara is a great leader. She's going to finish her thesis soon. But this young lady as an entrepreneur, let me suggest this. Okay? And then the modality is to work with Ihsan. He's representing actually the Graduate School of Business as a student representative. So Ihsan, you have to take that idea back to Kunrangsan. Okay? And, Flavio's visit here should not end with this. He's coming back to speak to tourism management majors sometime soon. Okay, at the invitation of John Barnes. Okay, Professor John Barnes. Now, friends from Nepal, you guys are very quiet. I wonder, do you have a question or a comment? Good. See, I love this guy. He's my type of fellow. Come on.
Yeah, so it's not basically another question, but as we know that Brazil is the _1 in water resources, right? So, and second is the Nepal, but what we have is like we have the capacity of producing 86,000 megawatt, and that is out of like maybe more than half of the South Asian countries. So, but the problem here in Nepal is like we're not able to generate that much energy of the water. So as being a _1 in water resources as Brazil, so what as Brazilian can suggest in Nepal about how you can utilize the water resources?
So the question relates to hydropower, basically, and Brazil has the largest hydropower, well, at least the highest installed capacity for hydropower generating in the world, and Nepal comes very close because, of course, the topography of the mountains and then of the water streams. So it's really interesting. Hydropower, after you build it, it's great. But the decision to build it, it's actually a very complicated one. Because first, you have to make a big investment up front, to build the dams and to put the power plants in place. So in some sort of way, you need to develop a project finance or a financing structure that will make you able to upfront pay for this, and then to pay for it on the long term as you generate the electricity. But it's different than, for example, coal generating, that the plant is much cheaper, but then you need to keep paying for the coal. The whole investment for generating is right up front, and then afterwards the cost of generating energy is zero, but still you need to depreciate everything that you already invested. So the first big tip is you need to have some financing structure in place. Second one, even if afterwards it's completely clean, there are natural impacts that are involved with it, and they are mostly related to the building of the dams. And this in Brazil is a big issue because you'll be flooding area in a way or in the other, and you will be flooding like maybe some jungle or maybe some areas that are inhabited by the people. So the decision to build it cannot be only a top-down decision where like an Ministry of Energy executive will go and sign it, let's build this dam here, and that's it, Actually, it needs to be discussed with the society as a whole, because there will be environmental and social costs involved with it. So I think the way out of it is one of inclusion. You include representatives, of course, at the end of the day, somebody needs to make a decision, and there will always be a trade-off involved. But then, if you get it right, and then like move people around and lower the impacts, it's still a very smart solution, because after it's settled and after the area is flooded, then the environmental impact is very low, because you're not generating greenhouse gases or any negative effect. And well, the third one is you need to be smart on how you use your hydro resources. And this we see in the use of the Mekong River in Laos. So they are building the dams there, but even in China, in the upper Mekong. But when it goes downstream, basically you are taking water out of the other countries that are being affected. In countries with Brazil, this problem is not as evident because the country is very big, so the river is all inside the country. But if you have geography where your water streams actually are international, as the example of the Mekong River, also you need to talk this with your partners. And then you can make something that is mutually beneficial, Maybe you won't build everything that you want because you need to guarantee the stream on the outflow of the river, but then the energy that you generate can also provide for that country, as in the case of Laos, that they will sell it to Thailand anyway. So it's also good for the other countries, but it's also something that needs to be internationally discussed. So I think hydropower, as I mentioned, I think it's a very, very good choice, but it needs to be done the smart way. And I'm sure Nepal is very well equipped to do it. And if you take the necessary steps to do a proper project financing for the infrastructure, then discuss the impact, and then see if it will have any international implications. If you check all these lists, then you can basically install the capacity. But then, even after you have the generating power in place, one big problem, and that's a problem in Brazil, is you need to set up the transmission lines. And the problem is transmitting energy, electricity, is not as easy as it seems. So, for example, the largest hydropower potential in Brazil is in the Amazon jungle. But like, what's the point of putting a hydro plant there that cannot take the energy to where the people are living? You know, most of the people live in the southern part of the country. So, if puts the energy in Nepal, you need to see how you market it and how the technology will actually transmit the energy that you're generating there to the final consumption market. Is that how you say? For the final consumption market. So I think lots of things to keep in mind, but if it's done the smart way, I think it's a great way to go.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to know that if Thai people have a small and have an idea to expand their business in Brazil, which industry that we can involve in your country? Which way that I can learn and get an information?
Okay, yes. Yeah, it was good. No, I hope I never get the tones right, so I hope I haven't cursed anybody. That's why I don't speak Thai nor Chinese, because I don't know how to say the words. But well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. In the Embassy of Brazil, we have a trade and investment promotion section, and actually I think the email is right there. It's the second email, secon.bangkok@Itamaraty. That email goes from our trade and investment promotion section. And one of the roles of the embassy is actually to facilitate reciprocal investments and trade and relations. So on a daily basis, we talk with Thai entrepreneurs that are interested in doing business with Brazil and with Brazilian businessmen that are interested in doing business with Thailand. So of course, we cannot come up with the idea, but if you have an idea, we can facilitate implementing it in a way, or at least pointing to the right direction. Just like some few examples. Recently I've met a Thai winemaker, and I actually make good wines here in Thailand. And this lady, who is an entrepreneur, she had this idea of importing table grapes from Brazil, because she thinks that the grapes that are sold in Thailand are not of good quality, and she's an expert on grapes because she runs a wine business. And then, like, she came to me and said, "Oh, how can we do it?" And then we say, "Well, you have to do like Food and Drugs Administration's requirements, and maybe you can go to these suppliers. We have these projects to facilitate the exports of fruits from Brazil, and then maybe we can think together the best way to move forward with the idea." But of course, first we need to have the idea from the private sides, and then we will help you to implement it. Because, of course, if I had the idea myself, I would be rich, right? And that's not the case. So you need to bring the idea to me, and then I will help you. It's not
Thank you. Now, one more from China. Sorry, that gentleman was from Thailand. My error.
Okay, Kop Kun Krap.
And here, from China, okay, my good friend Tommy.
All right, sir. I just have a question between Brazil and China. It's like the China is trying to change the economic structures, where move so fast, economy grows so fast. So we try to slowly our pace and change the economic structures. So, for example, we do not concentrate on the export. We are trying to care more about the import things. So what we can import from the Brazil, and for the One Belt, One Road, this policy, what we can do, import something, use this policy to China. And as the China has the service productivity in China is not sufficient. So is that Brazil can provide about these things to China, or you can like explain to me?
No, thank you for your question. Well, no doubt that China is the main partner for Brazil in Asia and one of the main partners in the world. I think China surpassed the United States as Brazil's second largest trade partner. Our largest trade partner is Argentina, and Argentina is next door, so it's quite given. But after Argentina, which is our direct neighbor, then the largest trade partner for Brazil already is China, larger than the European Union, larger than the United States already. So I can confidently say that you're already supplying a lot for China and already buying a lot for China. And even the Chinese economic cycle has direct impacts in Brazil. For example, when the China civil infrastructure market was very heated, then our iron ore was basically being shipped to China. And it's for our commodities business. We supply lots of the food and the inputs for the agricultural industry for China already. So when it comes down to trade, we already have a very, very developed, strong relationship. But I'm glad you mentioned the One Belt, One Road, because then this opens up other levels of partnerships, and maybe in some sort of way with a higher qualitative level. And in this way, I think we are already on a good track because both China and Brazil, we are very well acquainted with infrastructure financing, which is basically what is at the backbone of the One Belt, One Road initiative. And in this way, we already launched some initiatives together. You have the Chinese launching of the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and Brazil was one of the founding members. But now, due to our political crisis, I think the last time I checked, we are lagging on ratification. But still, the will is there, and probably after...
Sorry, that's an unnecessary intervention. Sorry, Flavio. Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
That's only temporary. They'll try to stop it permanently. Sorry, go ahead.
But then another initiative is get to be known as the Bank of the BRICS. It's called the New Development Bank, NDB, and the headquarters is in Shanghai. And the vice president is Brazilian, but is the former Brazilian representative to the IMF. Who is a Brazilian economist. So we still set up this bank in place. The idea is not only to finance BRICS projects, but projects of third countries that would also benefit from developing infrastructure and in this idea of expanding integration. And I think Brazil and China, we have lots of commonalities. Now they are talking about China's march to the West, and One Belt, One Road, and the new Silk Route, and the Maritime Silk Route. I don't know, there are so many routes and things going on. But then it's this whole process of integrating from the Far East Asia all the way up to Europe. And actually for the past maybe 20 years, that's what Brazil has tried to do in South America, integrating it too. And of course, the ways to do it is through infrastructure. So you would need to build roads, build bridges, and build like energy structures. So I think we're pretty much on the same page, Brazil and China. And I think we are already a very close partners. But what I would like to build upon your question is, in my personal view, Brazilian strategy of engagement with the East shouldn't be based solely in one country. Because you used to do it in the past with Japan, so because Brazil has a huge Japanese diaspora. We have 2 million descendants of Japanese living in Brazil. They went over there in the early 20s, like late 19th, early 20th century. So about 1% of the Brazilian population is from Japanese origin. So our whole interaction with Asia till very recently, till like the 90s, were like just Japan. And then after the 90s was just China. And I think we need to be a little bit more than that. And being quite frankly, even to balance more our relationship with China, because China is one superpower, and it's like it respects hard power as well. But if Brazil is too much attached to China by itself, then we won't be on the same level of playing. So, in a way, also to level the playing field, I think it's important to think about whole regional engagement. And then when you come with regional ideas, such the One Belt, One Road, if it's truly inclusive of many, many different partners, even if it's under a China leadership, I think it's also a good opportunity to expand our level of engagement, not only with one country, but with the whole region.
With more, I wonder, we have friends from Myanmar who've been very quiet, so I'm going to ask, do we have at least one question or comment from any of our friends from Myanmar? Thank you, Katie. Yes, that's very good. Katie is quite a gal. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm from Myanmar. Brazil is one holiday in Brazil is one of my dreams since I have watched the Rio Blue Macomb animations. Yeah, from last 4 years ago, the Brazil brand, the Flip Flop Harvest. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce what happened. Yeah, they came in and now very famous, popular, and successful in fashion industry. So yeah, I'm just saying that Myanmar is now opening, and for Brazil, what kinds of industry would be interest to invest in Myanmar? Yeah, for your opinion, yes.
Chiso Timbari Kanya. Okay. Well, actually, it's thank you for bringing Myanmar to the attention of the floor. I think Brazil is paying attention very closely to the process of opening of Myanmar. And as a matter of fact, the Embassy of Brazil in Bangkok used to be responsible for Myanmar as well, for the jurisdiction of Myanmar. Because here we are responsible also for Laos and Cambodia. But back in 2010, or 7 years ago, we opened a resident embassy in Yangon. So I think this proves how much attention we are paying to it and to the whole process. And of course, we have humanitarian interests on the issue, but also, of course, economic interests as well. Very surprisingly, when our Minister of Agriculture came to Thailand last year, his next destination was Myanmar, and this was a kind of a logistics problem because he wasn't going only to Yangon, but he went to Yangon and to Naypyidaw. Yes, to the capital, which is not as well connected as Yangon, but yes, right? Yeah, but well, so our Minister of Agriculture actually made all the way there, and why? Because, of course, agriculture, as I showed, it's like it's our, let's say, the ground troops for our exports, and now that Myanmar is opening up, there will surely be room to participate on that industry. I'm sure, for example, there is a big revolution in banking industry in Myanmar, but Brazilian banks don't internationalize in Asia yet as well. So maybe for the future, this can be also a place to explore. But what I can say to you, I think for Brazilians, if Thailand is still seen as an exotic destination, Myanmar is even more so. So I think it's lots of opportunities, and especially when you get, for example, you said I'm opening your mind to Brazil a little bit. I think if you get Burmese businessmen willing to open the Brazilian minds to Myanmar, it would be great, because Brazil, as I said, I think now we are on a very big crisis, but my forecast is after 2018, things will go back on track again. And 1 year goes like this. So maybe 2018, 2019, and from onwards, we start internationalizing again, investing a lot again. If you are well positioned, it's like stock markets. You need to buy the stock when it's low, right? Then you make the money when it goes up. So I think it's an opportunity. You need to take advantage that not many Brazilians know about Myanmar yet, and maybe you can be a big advocate of Myanmar in Brazil. And of course, we are here to help, and our embassy, our resident embassy in Yangon, will be more than happy to help too in this process.
Well, Thank you, Flavio. You know, my memories of visiting the Inlay Hotel was that their dinner buffets was with Brazilian food. So Brazil is very much present in the minds and hearts of Myanmar. It's just that Katie would like to bring more trade and fashion in. Okay, Flavio, you've done a very nice job. Sit down for a moment, Flavio, okay, please, all right? And I'm going to invite one of our friends from amongst the audience to come up and to say a few words of thanks to Flavio. Who would like to do that? Who would volunteer to do that? I haven't picked on anyone, but who will be willing to do it? I'm going to ask my friend here, you know, he's a smart guy. Gentlemen, please come up and express a few words. His name is Jacob, and he's a wise man. Go ahead. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
On behalf of all my fellow students here at ABAC, I'd like to thank you for your insight into the Brazilian economy. I myself have a lot more questions that I'd like to discuss later, maybe. But I think a lot of us here, we don't really get an idea of how monumentally big Brazil is as an economy and as a landmass and as a population and as a cultural force and as an agricultural force. So this has been really a great speech. Thank you so much.
Jacob, you know, you can't sit down. Just stand right here, okay? I'm going to ask Barbara and Raphael, right? Come forward, all right? And could I ask also that Louisa please come forward, okay? Don't worry, our cameraman is here. They are going to take a picture with you. Just leave your camera with him for Kailup Noina, okay? Come. And then all those who ask questions, can you guys please come forward? All those who ask questions, please come forward. Thank you. Very nice. Tommy, come. Yes, gentlemen, please. Okay. And let me ask that you stand this side of, yeah. Very nice. Move away from the middle. Let's give the center to Flavio, okay? Tan, can you move the screen up? And can you get the projector off? Okay? Very nice. Can you get the projector off? Thank you. Very nice. Now, what I'm going to do is to ask Barbara and Raphael to please hand over a plaque of appreciation on behalf of Assumption University to Flavio. Flavio, please come forward. Okay? And let's do this for a good photo op. Okay? Let's do it for a good photo op. Okay? Now, you guys go to the center. Yeah, to the center. And can we, yeah, make sure that you're seen. Move forward. Move forward. Move forward. Yeah? Yes, so that we can be seen as a group. Okay, wonderful.
Now we dance.
Yeah. Okay, that's the Brazilian way. Hey, hang on to this. Okay?